The fuel crisis in Russia continues to escalate, with gasoline supply disruptions reported in more than 50 regions. The situation is most acute in the Far East and occupied Crimea, according to the BBC Russian service. Gasoline supply problems in Russia first emerged in August in Transbaikal, Primorsk, and Sakhalin. Now, according to BBC estimates, supply shortages are occurring in more than half of the regions, including the central and southern regions. As a result of strikes by Ukrainian drones on Russian oil refineries, fuel supply problems have arisen in at least 57 regions of the country. Meanwhile, in occupied Crimea, the fuel situation is so critical that the occupiers have been forced to impose limits on fuel sales, as the peninsula does not have its own refineries and is entirely dependent on supplies. In Moscow and the largest cities, there is no widespread shortage yet, but there are interruptions in the supply of certain brands of fuel. The situation in the capital is considered exceptional. The city receives gasoline from 5 oil refineries at once, while most regions receive it from only 1 or 2. The further away from Moscow, the more pronounced the problems become, the publication states. According to Rosstat, gasoline prices at gas stations have risen by more than 10% since the beginning of the year, and wholesale prices have reached historic highs. Since the beginning of the year, Ukrainian drones have hit 21 of Russia's 38 major oil refineries, 48% more than in the entire previous year. Justin Crump, a former British Army officer and head of the consulting firm Sakhalin, notes that Kiev is deliberately focusing on attacks on the oil industry, seeing this as an effective way to put pressure on Moscow. The Moscow Times also reported that attacks have affected 1 in 3 oil refineries in Russia. There were 14 attacks in August alone, 8 in September, and 4 in the first 10 days of October.
Desertions among Russian occupiers have sharply increased in the Kherson area, according to agents of the Atesh resistance movement. According to them, at least 36 soldiers from the Russian Army's 217th Airborne Regiment have abandoned their positions in the past week alone. Deserters are hiding in abandoned houses, forests, and on local residents' private property, while some are attempting to cross into occupied Crimea to finally escape the war zone. According to the source, the situation has become widespread, indicating a decline in morale among Russian units in this sector of the front. The Occupation Forces Command is taking harsh measures in response. Mobile search teams have been created, offering cash bonuses and vacations for the capture of fugitives. Captured soldiers face court-martial and harsh punishment. However, instead of strengthening discipline, these actions only increase panic and distrust within the units. Representatives of the Atesh movement have once again appealed to Russian military personnel not to return to the front and to take advantage of the opportunity for safe evacuation. Don't wait to be captured or sent to certain death. We can organize your evacuation and guarantee your survival, the message reads. In this case, Russian command was urgently redeploying its troops to the Kherson area. The commander of the Ukrainian drone battalion operating in the Kherson sector reported that the Russian command had redeployed units of the 98th Division from the Chasiv Yar area to the Kherson sector to replace units of the 70th Motorized Rifle Division, which had been redeployed from the Kherson sector to the Donetsk region. These are the first reports that units of the 98th Division are operating outside the Chasiv Yar area, where the occupiers have been located since April 2023. ISW observed reports that some units of the 98th Division remained active in the Chasiv Yar area as recently as the 1st of October 2025, indicating that this reported Russian redeployment is likely occurring slowly, and that the division may be spreading its units across different sectors of the front. It is currently unclear whether the Russian military command will redeploy part or all of the 98th Division from the Chasiv Yar area to the Kherson direction or other parts of the front line. The 98th Division has been involved in active combat operations since April 2023, when it was involved in the final capture of Bakhmut. The 98th Division's units have degraded or have limited combat capability after 2.5 years of offensive operations. But the redeployment of the 98th Division may also indicate that the Russian military command intends to change the priorities of offensive operations in the Kherson direction. Russians started using old Ukrainian supply routes in the Serebryansky forest to move troops for their next move in Lyman. However, as Ukrainians held those positions for months, their drone operators knew exactly where to strike, tracking all their movements and unleashing devastating fire on the enemy front line and forces moving into position. Euromaidan press media outlet reports. Recall, Ukrainians withdrew in one go from the Serebryansky forest, as Russians had taken their handful of viable logistics routes through the trees under fire control with drones. However, this gave Ukrainians the brilliant idea and opportunity to turn the tables around on the Russians, as they knew exactly which paths were viable and where the Russians would be moving. The lack of defensive infrastructure compounds Russia's problems, as Ukrainians had not dug new trenches as they withdrew in one go, leaving Russians with large areas without dugouts, tunnels, or proper fortifications. This left even less space for Russians to store supplies and equipment, which were now all concentrated on several larger routes through the forest. Russian troops moving in now must make do with foxholes and improvised shelters, which offer little protection against artillery and none against drones attacking from above. After taking one bigger trench fortification at the end of the forest across the village, Russian commanders hoped to use it to advance more easily, Euromaidan press says. On the contrary, this has made their attempts even more predictable than they already were, with every step forward turned into a death march for their assault groups. Ukrainian troops report that Russian commanders keep sending small groups into Yampil, but almost none survive. Ukrainian drone surveillance monitors every movement, destroying infiltrators before they gather strength, which buys critical time for the defense of the settlement. Ukrainian fighters highlight that without the drones, their overstretched defenses would be under far greater pressure. Instead, Yampil remains under Ukrainian control, with Russian assaults collapsing before they can establish any foothold. Overall, by abandoning the forest in one go, instead of in a drawn-out battle, while on the back foot, the Ukrainians forced Russia into using the very routes that once threatened them, turning what was once a liability into an advantage. Euromaidan press says. Now they have effectively become kill zones for Ukrainian surveillance and firepower, with Russian assault groups being shredded by drones before they can mass. The Serebryansky forest has turned into a trap and is currently far from being Russia's staging ground for deeper breakthroughs. Meanwhile, the settlement of Yampil is being held firm by Ukrainians and remains a stronghold that makes every Russian step a costly one.